As goes Israel, goes Europe. As goes Israel, goes the United States. As goes Israel, goes Africa. There is no local. There's only one people and one breath and one humanity. No one's outside the circle. Right? And it's all a holy and a broken hallelujah. Right? You know, how did this all happen? So let's understand this very, very clearly. Okay? Let's feel each other. Do I think, Becca, that the local population, again, when we talk about Palestine, we don't even know what that is. Right? We don't even know what that is. Okay, but let's try and understand what we really mean. Let's get out of slogans. Let's talk about what we're really talking about here, okay? So now I'm going to kind of go this next step and actually talk, which we haven't done up till now, about what's the storyline. You got to be able to track a story. And there should be a possibility of creating a shared story of value in which the entire population of this tragically disputed territory, right, should be able to actually agree on. Okay? And if we can't feel, if we're not willing to actually place attention on the story, then again, we're not Homo Amor. Homo Amor places attention. And the Hebrew word for placing attention is sim lev. Let me place my attention. So let's place our attention. Okay? So, and I'm going to tell you in the beginning, I'm going to already tell you my conclusion. Okay? I think there are two legitimate competing claims on the same land. Are we clear about that? Becca, did you hear that, my sister, my love? There are two legitimate competing claims on the same land. That's big. That's a big thing to say. I want to say it again. There are two legitimate competing claims on the same land. Does everyone hear that? Who hears that? Okay, that's big. Hold that with me. Hold that with me. Hold that with me. Okay, so now what do I do when that's the case? That's the question. But first, let me just tell you a little bit of the story. The Ottoman Empire controlled, right, what is now the space where there are essentially 22 Arab states covering vast amounts of territory with, I don't know the exact amount, but 100+ million, right? Huge amount of people. Then there's this tiny sliver that's today called Israel, which has 9 million people. Okay? How did we get here? What happened? So essentially, let me just walk you through, just very, very, very simply, what actually happened in this story, so we can actually just get a sense of just kind of like, how did we get here? Like, what actually happened here? So what happened is, Britain is awarded what's called the British Mandate. So Britain is told, right, when the Ottoman Empire collapses, Britain takes over the primary mandate for all of the territory in the Middle East. Okay? Now, all of the countries, Egypt and Iraq and Jordan and in Libya and in Israel, right? All right, everything that was established in this area was not established because they operated independently. In other words, it's not like, oh, there used to be a Palestinian state that got conquered. Never happened. There were only 3 independent political commonwealths, right, in this area ever in human history. And those were 3 Jewish commonwealths that lived there over history. That's just factually true. There was never any other independent sovereign government in this place other than 3 Jewish commonwealths. And again, let me say in advance, I'm not going to now give you, this is the Jewish position. I've already said in advance, there are 2 legitimate competing claims on this land. Okay? So now let's just kind of relax, surrender, right? Soften our armor. Let's just kind of hear it for a second. Now, when I'm going to try and do this just and this needs several hours to do well. I'm going to just try and do it in a few minutes. So when the destruction of the second Jewish Commonwealth happens, some some short amount of time after Jesus, the Roman governor of the area calls it Palestina, right? In order to break its connection to the Jewish people, it's called Palestina. And then, for 1800 years, right, there is local indigenous populations, right? This is even before there's an Arab world, right? And there's many, many stages of local populations in this huge mass of land, right, in this Arabian Peninsula, okay? One of the populations that's there, right, is a Jewish population that maintains a steady, small Jewish presence, right, all through the last couple of thousand years. And the Jewish communities that are exiled and massacred all over the world all maintain and look to Israel, right, as their home. These are just facts. Okay. During the time of the Ottoman Empire, this land, this Fertile Crescent, is occupied, right, again, this entire Arabian Peninsula by local populations, right, which we now call Arab populations. This is under the Islamic Ottoman Empire, which falls. Britain then kind of takes over. It's after World War I. Now, what essentially happens is there are within this Arabian Peninsula, right, Britain makes a decision and establishes some, depending how you count, 19, 20, 21, 22, whatever the count is, independent, sovereign Arab states. That's one. In one part of the land, which is the part of the land which is now called Israel-Palestine, there is an infusion of Jewish settlers who come from Europe wanting to return to what their native history, the biblical history, has told them is the Jewish homeland. When they start coming in the late 1880s, 1890s, 1900, 1910, 1920, right, there are very, very deep relationships that are established with the local Arab community. The local Arab community is obviously filled with many, many beautiful people, and there are mutually productive relationships started, which are quite beautiful and quite deep and quite profound. What then happens is, about 1920, Great Britain takes over the mandate, and within the Arab world, there are two major strains, major expressions of the Arab voice. One, which is enormously powerful, many historians say a majority. I haven't verified all those facts, but a huge, powerful, major kind of mainstream Arab position, which is expressed by the Nashahibi family. It's the name of kind of one central Arab clan. Emir Faisal earlier on is another expression of it, who has a deep relationship with Chaim Weizmann, who was later to become the first Jewish president, right, of the Israeli state, the first Israeli president of the Israeli state. And there's this enormous possibility that we could actually share this land in some way, whatever that means. There's a second voice, which is incarnate in history most dramatically by the Mufti Husseini, right, whose agents and whose families at play for several decades, who in the end align with Hitler in World War II, who basically say no, right? They adopt a position similar to that today of Hamas, which says there cannot be any two competing claims in this land, right? This land must be purely not just Arab land. No, it has to be a particular kind of Islamic land for a particular brand of Islam, right? And from a particular militant brand of Islam, which basically says that the rest of the world is subject to the Islamic sword. And if there is any presence in the Arabian Peninsula of anything other than this particular brand of Islam, then it's a violation of the honor of the prophet, and blood must soak the land. Okay, those are the two basic positions that are taken. Okay? And Husseini won, right? Tragically. Tragically, Husseini carries the day. The Nashahibis are slaughtered. This is a long and detailed history that's been talked about. And let me try and walk through it a little bit here, okay? Let me try and walk through it a little bit. Let me walk through it a little more carefully. Okay? So in 2019, there's a conversation between Amir Faisal, who's a major Arab leader, and Weitzman, and they talk about a possibility of genuine Jewish-Arab coexistence. That's one. Two, 1920-21, huge massacres within, huge murders, use the word murders, taking place in the Arab world, where people aligned with actually creating a shared ground of value, right, with the Jews who are now returning, right, to Israel, and with the indigenous Jewish population, right? They say that can't be done. That's a violation of the honor of the prophet. So there's an extreme explosion of murders, 1920-21. 1936, there's what's called the Arab Revolt. The Arab Revolt, right, is fundamentally Husseini inspired. Again, this is where the massacre of the Nashahibis and of all the other voices for a shared ground of value in the Arab world are decimated. What is set up in response is called the Peel Commission. The Peel Commission is set up by Great Britain, and the Peel Commission recommends a dividing of the territory, with 80% of the territory going to the Arab population, with 20% of the territory going to the Jews, right? And the Husseini-led, inspired, Hamas-like position says absolute no. It's completely rejected. That's actually what happened. We go fast forward 10 years later. 10 years later, right, there's this development of the situation which deepens. There's more Jewish settlements, right? There's more massacres on the Arab side. There's this incitement to kind of a brand of Arab nationalism, which is not classical nationalism, but which is Husseini-inspired racist nationalism of the worst kind, which says that those outside of my ethnocentric circle aren't actually human in the same way, and the prophet's honor is violated. And so there's this 10 years of enormous pain. 1947, Great Britain says, we don't know what the fuck to do. They turn to the United Nations. The United Nations, right, says, again, let's partition the land. Let's split the land in two. Okay, again, with most of the land going Arab, less going to the Jews, right? The Jews say, we accept it. We'll accept this partition, right? The Arabs say categorically, no. And on the first day, right, when in response to this United Nations offer, right, Ben-Gurion, who's the prime minister, the first prime minister of Israel, declares independence, on that day, 5 Arab armies, which outgun in every way in terms of troops, guns, munitions, right, attack Israel, right, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, right, Syria, right, etc. The world thinks actually the Jews won't survive it, right? They do survive, right? And in that war, a couple of things happen. First, in surviving, that's called the Independence War, in surviving that war, 2 things happen. One, and both happened, I want to get really straight, both happened. One, and the Prime Minister of Syria writes about this in his memoir, right? The Arab leaders tell the Arab populations of, right, the disputed territories to leave, and then they'll return after the Jews have been wiped out, after the Jews have been massacred. Literally, those are the languages used. Hitler's job will be completed, then you'll return to your liberated lands. So what happens is there's an entire group of Arabs who leave for that reason, several 100,000. Then there's another group that are actually evicted, right in the war with intention by the Israeli side, because they feel like we're not going to be able to actually hold, right, a secure, right, new Israel. And so there's an actual forced transfer of population. That's actually true, right? There's this big argument. Do the Arabs who left in that moment leave voluntarily, or were they forced? Both are true. Actually, they're both true. So about 800,000 total, right, of local Arabs left their land. That's true. At the same time, there were about 800,000 of Jews who had been in Arab lands, for 1,000, 2,000 years, who were also forced out of their lands. So there was this actual population transfer on both sides. The Arab populations that left their lands became refugees. Now, I want you to get this. In 1949, right, after the war, the United Nations established UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Association, was established 70 years ago, right, to handle those 800,000 refugees, which the Arab leadership intentionally refused to integrate in any of the 22 larger Arab states in order to keep them as refugees as a linchpin for the eventual destruction and annihilation of Israel. That was a policy. I'm not even saying whether it was right or wrong. I'm just saying that was a policy. That's a fact. And in fact, the UNRWA still exists today. It's 70 years later, and it has a budget of $1 billion a year. It has a $1 billion a year budget until today. That's just true. That's true. The 800,000 refugees of Jews from Arab lands, who were also, some of them left voluntarily and others were forced out, were all absorbed in Israel and became part of the fabric and structure of Israel. Now, I'm not even saying now what's right, what's wrong. I'm just giving you, these are the objective facts of the situation. Now, did Israel behave brutally during the Independence War? So the answer to that question is almost unilaterally no. And you can read very, very carefully accounts of actually what happened. There was an enormous attempt to behave as morally as any army can. There's a famous account of one massacre that's called the Deir Yassin massacre. What actually happened there is hotly contested. Shmuel Katz, right, an intensely moral man that I met at the end of his life, wrote an account of what actually happened there in his book called Battleground, called Fact and Fantasy in Palestine. Right, there are opposing accounts that are circulated, right, by the Palestinian leadership, right, and that's a hotly contested account. I happen to believe Shmuel Katz's account, but I wasn't there. But that was an exception. Whatever happened there was a dramatic exception that was condemned, right, by the entire Jewish world. Right, the claim that there were somehow dozens of massacres is just not true. Was there a part of the population during Israel's independence war that was forcibly transferred? Yes, there was. Was there a part of the Jewish population that was forcibly transferred from Arab lands? Yes, there was. And virtually every nation state in the world is built on, right, the transfer of indigenous populations, which is tragic. That's absolutely true. I want to be really clear about that. But what's also true is that there's very clear competing claims here. There's a very, very legitimate Arab claim. And there's a very, very legitimate Jewish claim, right? Which is why, if we have a shared ground of value and we recognize we're all human beings, and we don't want to actually kill and destroy each other, and we recognize that we're all created Homo Amor, then we should be able to, right? We should be able to together create a new possibility. And that new possibility should be some version of what's called today a two-state solution. That's legitimate. That's honest. That's holy. Does everyone get that? And the overwhelming majority, right, of Israel, not everyone, but has always held that as a real possibility. And I've lived through myself 5 or 6 successive Israeli governments, right? And they've never been able to create a two-state solution because it was impossible to actually create, right? Tragically, I just want to get the tragedy of it, right? On the Arab side of the street, buy-in for the two-state solution. There was an utter refusal, right, to accept that possibility. So I want to just kind of get this, right? And again, this is not to say the Jews got it all right. This is not to say we shouldn't critique Israel, and not to say any of those things, right? But it is to say that if you actually understand and track what actually happened here, there was a suggestion in 1936 by the Peel Commission for a two-state solution, right, which was utterly rejected, right, by the local Arab population, infused with a Husseini-like diabolic hatred. And then in 1947, again, there was a two-state solution offered. And again, the Husseini-infused Hamas-like leadership, the tragic leadership, right, rejected it out of hand. Now, until this point, I want to see if we get this. I want to see if we kind of get this, right? Now, it's hard, right? It's hard to actually, right, trace this through. But here's where it gets really important to place your attention, friends. Next 5 minutes. Here we go. Stay really close. 1967. 1967. Until this point, there is no Gaza or West Bank. The West Bank is part of Jordan. Does everyone get that? West Bank's part of Jordan, literally. One of the new states established by Great Britain's mandate. Gaza is part of Egypt. And Nasser, who's the leader of Egypt, says he picks up that Husseini energy and mantle and says, we're going to complete Hitler's job and we're going to, right, wipe out the Jewish people. Israel launches for its survival a preemptive strike. In that preemptive strike, which is called the Six-Day War, and Israel begs Jordan not to get involved in the war, but Egypt attacks and Syria attacks and Jordan attacks. So in that war, Israel takes the West Bank. And it's the West Bank of the Jordan River. That's what it is. It's the West Bank of the Jordan River. Israel also takes the Gaza Strip. The West Bank is taken from Jordan in the preemptive strike war of survival by Israel, and the Gaza Strip is taken from Egypt. Now, that's Six-Day War is over. What should happen now? So there's a great debate in Israel about what should happen. And there's an overwhelmingly strong position that says, let's trade land for peace. And what land we're talking about now? So we're talking about the West Bank, right? Gaza. Both of those could be a ground for a Palestinian state. But the Arab League gathers a few months later in Khartoum and issues its famous 3 no's. No recognition, right? No negotiation, right? No coexistence, no peace. That's what they say. No recognition, no negotiation, no peace. Meaning, this is the third rejection of the possibility of a Palestinian state, unless there's no Israel. So the solution to the conflict has to be Israel's gone. Okay? That's 3. Right? That's in 1967. Those are the famous 3 no's of Khartoum. And then in 2007, Ehud Barak, 2000, the year 2000. In the year 2000, Ehud Barak meets Arafat with Clinton. Okay, with Clinton at Camp David. Right? And Barak, who's the prime minister of Israel, offers Arafat a Palestinian state again with 94% of the West Bank, with East Jerusalem as its capital, with Gaza. And as Clinton said, we were there for 14 days, and Arafat just said no. So there was an utter rejection. That's the 4th rejection. And finally, number 5, in 2008, Ehud Olmert, who I went jogging with in Jerusalem, who was the prime minister of Israel, goes even farther than Barak, adds land to the deal, meets with Abbas, right, who is Arafat's successor, and Abbas cannot muster support for this. He says no. He turns it down again. So I just want you to get this. So 5 times there's been the possibility of a 2-state solution, right? And 5 times, does everyone get this? 5 times there's been an utter dramatic no. And I'm praying that the people who were here in the beginning kind of had enough attention and heart to stay in. Stay in here. Actually follow the story. Now, in the middle of this, stay close. Stay close. In the middle of this, Israel, in other words, between 2006, 2008, right, Israel actually unilaterally, and it's before Olmert in 2008, offers the fifth possible land for peace deal. Israel unilaterally withdraws from Gaza. Does everyone get that? Israel unilaterally withdraws from Gaza. Everyone get this? Israel unilaterally withdraws. Egypt doesn't want to take Gaza back. Egypt says no. Hamas comes to rule Gaza. Hamas could have turned Gaza into a flowering state. There was more aid offered to Gaza from around the world for education, for infrastructure, right? For building, for creativity, right? There were 1,000 programs, right, to create bridges of peace of every kind. And Hamas made a decision, right, in the tradition of the Husseini tradition, which is, in the name of the Prophet Allah, Palestine must be soaked with the blood of every Jew. No distinction between Israeli and Jew, of every Jew, because their very existence here is an affront. Let's understand this. So my beloved Sharmila, I am completely in favor of a two-state solution. I would fucking give up Jerusalem itself to make peace. If I thought we could have an Israeli state without Jerusalem as its capital, I'd give it up for the sake of peace. That's not the situation. Okay, can you hear that, my friends? That's not the situation. Does that mean Israel's gotten it right all the time? Of course Israel hasn't gotten it right all the time. But can I state as an absolute fact, right, that the overwhelming majority of the Israeli population would make peace? I absolutely can. Is there a sector of the Israeli population, stay close with me, right? Place our attention, be a lover. Place your attention. Is there a sector of the Israeli population that says we have to keep every inch of Judea and Samaria no matter what? Yes, there is a sector like that. I believe that sector is wrong. And even within that sector within which I lived, even within that sector within which I lived, right? If there was a possibility for peace, Israel would have gone for it. Now, I want you to get this really, really straight, okay? I want you to stay really, really close to me, friends. This is a story that's not told. This is a story that's not told. We talk about the West Bank, and I don't know where my beloved Beck is, but I hope you're here, beloved. Okay, this is for you, my love. Okay, because you represent beautifully this voice of Abraham, gorgeously. But stay close, okay? Stay close. It's a story that's not told. So we talk about the West Bank. So there's the sense, oh, the West Bank, there was a Palestinian nation that was conquered in the West Bank. No. The West Bank was part of Jordan. It was taken by Israel in a preemptive war for its survival in 1967. Jordan didn't want to take the West Bank back. Right? Let's just understand this. If you remove the West Bank from Israel in its current structure, go really slow with me, okay? Can everyone go slow? Let's say you get rid of the West Bank. So if there's no West Bank, like if you turn the West Bank into an independent state today, there's no West Bank. That means that Israel, which is this tiny country in the middle of the Middle East, that Israel at its very center, the center of Israel, if you see Israel on a map, the center of Israel will be 9 miles wide. Does everyone get that? How many people get that? If you give the West Bank, you can't give it back to Jordan, they don't want it. So if you allow the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank, which I've been in favor of, right? But what's the problem? So 2 problems. And I want you to get both problems really clearly. One, that means that Israel's waste, at the center of the country, the most populated parts of Israel is literally 9 miles wide. How long does it take to drive 9 miles, my friends? How long does it take? 20 minutes? Meaning you can cut the country in half in a surprise attack like that which happened 8 days ago in a period of a half hour. Stay close. If you cut the country in half, Israel can't mobilize to defend itself because Israel has a very small standing army. It can't afford to keep a large standing army. So its army is of shopkeepers and shoemakers and doctors and kindergarten teachers. You have to mobilize that army like Israel just did. Mobilizing that army takes several days, but if you cut the country in half, you can't mobilize the army. So that's the security reason for keeping the West Bank. That's one, but here's two. If there was any ground to believe that Israel could actually create, that Israel could actually support the creation on the West Bank of an independent Palestinian state which would be a democracy and live next to Israel and support universal human rights and the rights of the feminine, right? And the rights of girls and the rights of the basic notion of the integrity and decency of every human being, Israel would say, fuck it. Create an independent Palestinian state. We're going to trust that state and we'll live together in peace. But there's zero indication that that can happen. In fact, in all likelihood, if a state was established on the West Bank, it would become a terror state like Gaza. So what's Israel supposed to do, my friends? Okay? Does everyone understand why I didn't begin? Does everyone understand why I didn't begin by, okay, what should Israel do? Right? Does everyone understand how absurd that conversation would be? Slow. Like, wow, slow. Let's place our attention. Let's love each other. Let's unfold this story step at a time. So now you tell me, my friends, what is Israel supposed to do? Does everyone get the horror and the impossibility? Right? Oh my God. Right? The horror and the impossibility. So there's not a moral equivalence. Okay, this is the very last point. And with this, we finished. I know that we're way, way, way over time. But I want to finish just with this last point. And I know that there's so much that we needed to do and that we didn't do. Right? But I want to just say something about the feminine, about women. How you treat women goes the world. Now, that doesn't mean that women are always right. Women can make false complaints. Women can be brutal. But it's not that the feminine is good and the masculine is bad. That's not what I mean. But how we treat, when I say women, I mean innocent women and children. How we treat innocent, I'm using women and children in the classical way of innocence. How you treat innocent women and children is how the world goes. Okay? Iran and Hamas are the people who are brutalizing the feminine, brutalizing women worse than any other force in the world today. And they're joined by Al-Qaeda, they're joined by Hezbollah, and they're joined by, right, the current rulers of Afghanistan, who are all expressions of the same Khomeini strain, the same very narrow strain that's basically been infused by some of the mainstream tenets of Islam, but didn't go the Rumi way, didn't go the Hafiz way, but went the debased and horrific way. And their view of the feminine is horrific. They all endorse what's called honor killing. If a woman is suspected of somehow expressing herself sexually outside, proof doesn't need to be brought. She can be brutally killed by her family. And the family is generally let off the hook because it's an understandable honor killing. Let's just understand what we're talking about here. Let's understand what we're talking about here. So that's what we're going to support? We're going to create a moral equivalence between Israel or the United States, which are flawed. But we're going to create a moral equivalence between those two? Really? So yes, nation states might not be our future. It's a big conversation. Yes, there may be those profiting from war. That may well be true, which is tragic. And the global capitalist structure is tragic, that profits from war. Yes, that's also true. That needs to be taken into account in a very real way. And yes, there undoubtedly have been tragic mistakes by Israel, without question. But who is your hero? Right? What is the story from which you're generating reality? Right? Those distinctions are essential. What's your narrative of desire? Right? How do you go into a trance festival where people are at their most pure, they're most open? There's no left, there's no right, there's no Jew, there's no non-Jew. There's just human beings dancing as she, and violate and mutilate in the most horrific way possible. And then literally, right, kill a child in front of parents and a parent in front of a child. Kill a grandmother and upload her murder to her own Facebook site. And all of that, as the children in Gaza said, is an expression of some version of a twisted and insane form of tragic human ideology. So you ask me, what should Israel do now? I don't know. I do think that Israel, as I think Marilyn said earlier, I think Israel cannot cut off food and water. So Marilyn, thank you for saying that. I think you're right. I think you're right, Marilyn. I don't know if you're here anymore, but I think you're right. Right? Israel cannot cut off food and water. And if Marilyn's not here, please let her know. Right? And Israel correctly opened the water in Gaza South. Right? That was the right thing to do. And Israel's been desperately looking for, right? Israel's been desperately looking for routes of escape. And Egypt has shut the door, and Jordan has shut the door. So I want to understand the tragic impossibility of this. But we can only begin this conversation if we're willing to stay in. I cannot be Homo Amor unless I place my attention. And I want to invite everyone to read. Read. So if you want to read, I'm going to give you a mainstream centrist position. Right? Read a book by Daniel Gordis, Gordis, right? Who's a colleague of mine. I haven't spoken to him in 20 years. We don't know each other well. But he wrote a book in kind of the history of Israel. And it's a balanced book that critiques the Israeli government, Gordis, right? Critiques, right, the Israeli government on multiple accounts. But it's worth reading. As goes Israel, goes Europe. As goes Israel, goes the United States. As goes Israel, goes Africa. There is no local. There's only one people and one breath and one humanity. No one's outside the circle. Right? And it's all a holy and a broken hallelujah.